I was thinking about this earlier. If you hand a broken smartphone to an engineer, they can just, pry it open, look at all the intricate little circuits, and diagnose it in like seconds.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Like they can point a pair of tweezers in there and say, "Oh, well, there's your problem. You've got a fried battery cell here, and I don't know, a cracked logic board right there."
Right, because the entire system is completely, unapologetically physical.
Exactly.
It is entirely tangible. I mean, you are dealing with discrete, measurable components.
Yeah.
You can literally trace the path of electricity from the charging port all the way to the little pixels lighting up the screen.
Right. You can see the whole journey.
Exactly. And when something breaks, you just find the physical interruption and you bridge the gap. It's straightforward.
But then, and this is where it gets crazy to me.
Yeah.
You ask that same brilliant engineer, or, even a highly trained neurobiologist, to open up the human brain and point to where a thought is actually manufactured.
Good luck with that.
Right. You ask them to look at that, 3-pound mass of gray matter and point to the exact cluster of cells where, like, the feeling of grief lives, or where the vivid memory of your favorite childhood song is actually stored.
Yeah.
And suddenly that physical, point-and-fix approach just totally falls apart.
It completely disintegrates.
Right, because we can fix the hardware of a phone, and we can even map the physical pathways of a brain, but when we try to locate the actual user, like the entity experiencing the thought, we are staring into a space that is just incredibly murky.
Oh, it constitutes the ultimate blind spot in modern biology. I mean, we live in an era where we have sequenced the entire human genome,
Yeah.
We have functional MRI machines that can track individual clusters of neurons firing with, honestly, staggering precision.
Yeah, you see the brain light up on the screen.
Exactly, highlighting regions as they process language or sensory input. But yet, despite all of that high-resolution mapping, science just hits this massive, seemingly impenetrable roadblock when it comes to locating the actual source of our subjective experience.
Which is wild. We can see the gears turning, but we can't find the ghost in the machine.
Exactly. We cannot find the ghost.
Which actually brings us perfectly to the fascinating materials you brought in today for this deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this.
Me too. So we are looking at a contemporary reflection dated August 19th, 2026, on a text that was composed, well, thousands of years ago, the Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
And specifically, we are diving into a really deep analysis of chapter 7, verses 5 and 6. And, what I found so compelling about these notes is how they take this ancient Sanskrit philosophy and just sort of violently collide it with cutting-edge 21st century science.
This is a really bold synthesis, yeah.
It really is. I mean, our mission today is exploring how this source material bridges thousands of years of human thought to address neurobiology, quantum mechanics, cosmology, and perhaps most surprisingly, the very modern epidemic of existential dread.
Right. Because the reflection you're referencing, it attempts this remarkably ambitious task. It uses these two ancient verses not just as like nice spiritual poetry,
Right, not just as a metaphor.
Exactly. It uses them as a rigid framework to address the exact scientific roadblocks we were just talking about.
Right.
It suggests that the philosophical models laid out in antiquity might actually offer the missing key to our most frustrating contemporary scientific dead ends.
Well, let's jump straight into the framework then, because it sets up a very specific way of looking at reality. To give a little context, the notes mentioned that yesterday's reflection focused on verse 4 of chapter 7.
Yeah.
And that mapped out something called the eightfold material elements, which is termed apara prakriti.
Right, apara prakriti. This is essentially categorized as the lower material nature. So in the context of this text, this encompasses the entirety of the objective physical universe.
Everything physical.
Everything physical. It is the raw matter, the fundamental chemistry, the thermodynamics, even the physical forces like, gravity and electromagnetism.
So if I can touch it, measure it, look at it through a telescope.
Exactly. If you can observe it through a microscope or a telescope, it falls under this category of apara prakriti. But crucially, and this is where it gets interesting, the text also includes something it calls our cognitive circuitry within this lower material nature.
Yeah, that inclusion of cognitive circuitry is what really threw me for a loop. Because, we normally think of our minds as something elevated, right? Something beyond just base matter.
Oh, absolutely. We conflate mind and matter all the time.
Right. But today, the notes focus on verse 5, where Krishna introduces an entirely new, separate concept to Arjuna. He introduces Parakriti, and the text defines this as the higher spiritual nature. He uses conscious living beings, using the Sanskrit term jiva bhutam. And it's described not as matter, but as the irreducible, non-physical light of conscious awareness.
Which is a huge distinction.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because reading through these two definitions, it sounds remarkably like a computer system to me.
Oh, really? How so? Walk me through the parallel you're drawing there.
Well, think about Aparaprukti, right? The lower material nature. Think of that as the computer hardware.
Okay.
It's the silicon, the motherboard, the glass screen, the lithium-ion battery. And because the text includes cognitive circuitry in this lower nature, that means the hardware also includes the processing chips.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Right, the algorithmic circuits that crunch data. In our biological bodies, that would be the brain, the neurochemistry, the firing synapses.
Exactly.
But here's the thing about a computer. No matter how powerful its processors are, no matter how much data it can crunch, it just sits there, cold on a desk, until someone turns it on and interacts with it.
It needs a user.
Yes. So Paraprati, this higher spiritual nature of conscious awareness, is the actual user. Or maybe it's like the animating software spark that gives the dead machine actual purpose, direction, and life.
You are hitting on the fundamental divide the text establishes perfectly. I mean, the source material explicitly emphasizes this dual aspect of reality.
Right.
And your distinction between the processing chip and the user highlights something absolutely vital that modern science, honestly, often conflates.
Yeah, we tend to mash them together.
We do. In our current paradigm, we tend to assume that computation equals consciousness.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. We assume that because the brain processes information at incredibly high speeds, that processing activity is the consciousness itself.
We assume the processor is the one reading the screen.
Exactly. We assume the biological machine is somehow experiencing its own mechanics.
Which, when you say it out loud, sounds kind of crazy.
It does. But the Gita draws a hard, definitive line separating the two. The biological hardware, the brain, the nervous system, the sensory organs, all of that is firmly locked inside apara prakriti.
Just matter.
It is incredibly complex objective matter, yes, but it is still just matter. The conscious awareness that actually experiences the outputs of that brain, the entity that feels pain, that knows it exists, that is para prakriti.
A higher nature.
Right. It is an entirely different category of reality. It is a non-physical substrate.
Okay, but if consciousness is this entirely separate higher nature, like if it is completely distinct from our material hardware, how on earth does a modern neurobiologist deal with that?
Well, they struggle with it deeply.
Because it feels like if you accept this premise, it creates an unsolvable problem for anyone trying to study the brain in, like, a laboratory setting.
Oh, it creates what is arguably the most fiercely debated roadblock in all of modern philosophy and science. It leads us directly into what the philosopher David Chalmers famously coined the hard problem of consciousness.
Right, which our source material specifically points out as the core dilemma of modern neuroscience. But let's break that down for a second, because I hear hard problem, and I just think of, like, a really difficult math equation on a chalkboard.
Right.
What makes this specific problem so impossible to solve?
So, to understand the hard problem, we have to look closely at how the scientific method actually operates. Science is unparalleled at mapping physical mechanisms, which Chalmers calls the easy problem.
Easy in massive air quotes, I assume.
Exactly. They aren't simple, but they are mechanically solvable. For example, a neurobiologist can trace the exact physical journey of light.
Okay.
They can explain how photons enter the cornea, strike the retina, convert into electrical signals, travel down the optic nerve, and stimulate specific neural networks in the visual cortex. Every single step. We can map every objective, unconscious piece of matter involved. The brain cells, the chemical transmitters, the electrical impulses.
So we can trace the wiring of the biological machine perfectly.
Down to the molecular level. But the hard problem asks a question that completely breaks that mechanistic approach. It asks, how and why do those purely objective, physical, unconscious processes suddenly produce a subjective experience?
You mean the actual internal feeling of being alive?
Right. Think about the concept of qualia.
Qualia.
Yeah, Q-A-L-I-A. It means the subjective, qualitative feel of an experience. Like, why doesn't all that complex visual processing just happen in the dark?
Oh, like a computer processing video files without a monitor turned on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A computer doesn't experience the video it processes. Yet when a specific pattern of of electrical impulses fires in your visual cortex, it suddenly results in the vivid, subjective, internal experience of seeing the color red. Or consider human emotion, right? How does a cascade of neurochemicals like dopamine and oxytocin suddenly produce the profound, unmistakable sensation of being in love?
It's an enormous jump.
It is a colossal leap, and neuroscience simply cannot bridge it. There is no physical law that explains how meat becomes aware of itself.
Wow. It's kind of like trying to explain how a bunch of brass gears and steel springs inside a grandfather clock suddenly start feeling anxious that they're running late.
That is a fantastic analogy, yes.
Right, because you can understand every single gear, but anxiety isn't made of brass. It just doesn't logically follow from the parts.
Exactly. That explanatory gap is precisely where the frustration lies in modern science. And this is where verse 5 of the Gita steps in to offer a radically different framework. The source material notes that the Gita circumvents the hard problem entirely by making a very simple yet foundational assertion.
What is it?
It asserts that consciousness is not a byproduct of matter.
Wait, let's pause right there because the implications of that are pretty staggering. If consciousness is not manufactured by the brain, like the brain is just receiving it or acting as a housing unit for it, doesn't that flip our entire modern biological assumption completely upside down?
Oh, totally upside down.
Because the whole scientific consensus is that we are meat machines generating thought, right? But this text is arguing that we are consciousness animating meat.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is how this perspective entirely upends the traditional scientific hierarchy. Because for the last few centuries, science has operated on a bottom-up model of reality.
Bottom up, yeah.
The underlying assumption has always been that you start with dead, unconscious atoms. Those atoms bond to form molecules. Molecules form simple, single-celled organisms. Those cells evolve into complex nervous systems, and eventually, if you stack enough complexity together in a brain...
Poof.
Right, poof.
Yeah.
Consciousness magically emerges as a miraculous byproduct of all that dense biology.
Right, so that's the bottom-up approach. You just stack enough matter, and eventually, a mind bubbles up out of it.
That is the materialist hope, yes. But the Gita establishes reality from the top down. It states that conscious awareness, paraprati, is a foundational, higher dimension of cosmic reality.
Meaning it was already there.
Exactly. It exists prior to and entirely independent of the physical material structure. It is the fundamental force that descends to animate the matter rather than some lucky accident that emerges out of complex biology.
That is wild. It completely relieves neuroscience of the burden of trying to find the magic biological threshold where chemistry suddenly turns into a soul.
It does.
The text is essentially looking at modern science and saying, you know, you're frustrated because you're looking in the exact wrong direction.
It suggests science is committing a profound category error. It's like if you were trying to find the origin of consciousness by dissecting the physical lobes of the brain, you are akin to an engineer taking a hammer to a radio to find the origin of the music it's playing.
Oh, that's brilliant.
You can smash the vacuum tubes, you can cut the wires, you can map every single circuit. The radio receives the signal, right? It channels it. It gives the music a physical, localized expression in the room.
But the signal itself is coming from a broadcast tower way outside the radio.
Far beyond the physical boundaries of that little plastic box. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so if consciousness isn't just an evolutionary accident trapped inside our skulls, if it is this foundational broadcasted cosmic force, what exactly is its role in the wider universe? Because reading through the translation here, it sounds like this force does a whole lot more than just let humans experience the color red or feel love.
Oh, it operates on a scale far, far beyond just biological perception. To understand its true cosmic role, we have to look closely at the specific Sanskrit phrasing used in verse 5.
Okay, lay it on me.
The phrase the reflection highlights is yada daryata jagat.
Yada daryata jagat. And the source translates that as by which this entire universe is animated and sustained.
Yes. And the word sustained carries immense weight in that translation. The Gita is proposing that the material universe, the galaxies, the stars, the planets, it doesn't just exist independently on its own, grinding away in the dark like a blind machine.
Right.
It actually requires this higher conscious energy, this paraprakriti, to hold its physical form together.
Which brings us to another massive, head-spinning scientific connection from the notes. Because we are shifting gears now from neurobiology into quantum physics.
Yes, we are.
The source material draws a direct line between this ancient Sanskrit assertion and the modern observer effect in quantum mechanics.
And the convergence between these two fields is genuinely startling when you break down the mechanics of it.
It really is.
In classical Newtonian physics, we treated the universe as a giant objective clockwork mechanism. The assumption was that the universe existed entirely independently of any observer.
Like if human beings weren't here to look at the moon would still be exactly where it is, doing its exact same thing.
Exactly. But the advent of quantum mechanics in the early 20th century shattered that assumption completely.
Right, because when physicists started looking at reality at the subatomic level, looking at, electrons and photons, they realized things don't exist in fixed, definitive states until they are actually observed.
Right. To grasp the gravity of this, consider the famous double-slit experiment, which is essentially the bedrock of quantum mechanics.
Okay, let's walk through that because it's so weird.
It is incredibly weird. When scientists shoot subatomic particles, like photons, toward a barrier with two slits, and they don't observe which slit the particle goes through.
They just let it do its thing.
Right. The particle behaves like a wave. It creates an interference pattern on the wall behind the slits, suggesting it essentially went through both slits at the exact same time.
Which shouldn't be possible for a solid particle.
No, it shouldn't. It exists in a state of probability, a superposition of all possible routes.
But the crazy part is, what happens when they actually try to watch it happen?
Exactly. When scientists place a detector at the slits to measure definitively which slit the photon passes through, the entire system changes. The wave function collapses.
It just snaps into reality.
Yes. The photon stops acting like a wave of probabilities and acts like a definitive, solid particle going through only one slit.
Just because we looked at it.
Just because we looked. The very act of measurement, the introduction of an observer into the system, forces the physical universe to abandon its cloud of possibilities and cement itself into a single, tangible reality.
Okay, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Please do.
Because this is where quantum mysticism usually kind of runs off the rails for me. Aren't a lot of modern physicists highly critical of using the observer effect to prove some, mystical spiritual consciousness?
Oh, absolutely.
Because in physics, an observer doesn't necessarily mean a conscious human mind with a soul, right? Doesn't observation just mean measurement? Like a mindless digital camera bouncing a photon off an electron to measure it counts as an observer, and that collapses the wave function without any conscious awareness involved at all.
You are touching on one of the most fierce debates in quantum foundations, and your skepticism is entirely warranted here.
Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not totally off base.
Not at all. It is true that many physicists argue that decoherence, which is the collapse of the wave function, is just a physical interaction between particles and a measuring device requiring no conscious mind.
Right.
However, the pioneers of quantum mechanics, physicists like Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, and Eugene Wigner, vehemently argued otherwise.
Really? The founders themselves?
Yes. Wigner famously stated that it is impossible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness.
Wait, why? If the camera measures it, why does consciousness matter?
Because even if a camera measures the photon, the camera itself is made of quantum particles, right? Which means the camera is also existing in a state of probability.
Oh, man.
So who collapses the camera? And who collapses the computer reading the camera's data? The chain of probability continues indefinitely until the information registers in the subjective awareness of a conscious mind.
Because the mind isn't made of the quantum rules.
Exactly. The mind is the only thing not bound by the physical quantum rules, making it the ultimate endpoint that collapses the reality. This is known as the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then. Because if we use that interpretation of the observer effect, and we look back at the Sanskrit phrase from the Gita 7.05 7.06, that consciousness sustains the universe, they are arguing the exact same underlying mechanism.
They absolutely are.
The Gita mirrors the most profound implications of quantum physics. It asserts that consciousness isn't just passively sitting in a theater seat watching the universe perform on stage. It is the active substrate that actually builds the stage.
Yes. The observer and the observed are inextricably, fundamentally linked. The universe is not a pre-built, objective container that we simply occupy. The physical stage, the apaprajit, literally requires the non-physical conscious awareness, the padaprati, to hold itself together in a defined, measurable state.
I read an analogy for this recently that just completely blew my mind.
Oh yeah, what was it?
It compared quantum reality to a massive open-world video game engine.
Okay, I like that.
Right. So if you are playing a beautifully rendered video game, the computer doesn't waste its processing power rendering the entire planet at once.
Oh, right, because that would crash the system.
Exactly. The trees in the forest behind you or the mountains 10 miles away, they don't actually exist as solid 3D models while you aren't looking at them. They exist as code, as probabilities in the game's memory.
Yeah.
It's only when you pan your camera to look at the forest that the game engine instantly collapses that code into a rendered solid tree. The virtual world literally requires the player's camera, the observer, to build the reality in real time.
That is a remarkably apt translation of the quantum dilemma into modern terms. I mean, without the player's localized perspective, the virtual world remains a soup of unrendered code.
Right.
Similarly, without the localized perspective of consciousness, the material universe remains a mathematical wave of uncollapsed probabilities. It fundamentally reorients our entire relationship to reality.
It really does.
We are forced to abandon the idea that we are passive, accidental tourists wandering through a cold, dead universe. Instead, we become the active, sustaining force of a living, interactive cosmos.
Okay, so if we accept this grand premise, right?
Yeah.
That consciousness is this vast cosmic principle required to sustain reality itself. How does that explain me?
What do you mean?
I mean, how does this massive universe-spanning force scale down and squeeze into a single, localized human body? Because navigating the grocery store on a Tuesday doesn't exactly feel like I'm sustaining the cosmos.
Right, right.
And that brings us to verse 6 in the source material, which seems to answer how this actually manifests biologically.
Yes. Verse 6 is where the text grounds these sweeping macrocosmic theories into the biological reality of the individual.
Okay.
The translation provided in the notes reads, "Understand that all created beings have their cosmic origin in these two natures." And the specific Sanskrit term utilized here is etadyonini.
Etadyonini.
Yes, which translates to having their cosmic origin or source in this duality.
So it takes the hardware and software analogy we discussed earlier and roots it directly into the genesis of living creatures.
It establishes what the author of the reflection refers to as the biological matrix.
Sounds very sci-fi.
It does, but it's very profound. It suggests that every single living organism you encounter, whether it is a complex human being, a dog walking down the street, or even a simple oak tree, is not just a biological accident, but a deliberate interplay of these two distinct natures.
Okay.
It is a localized fusion of physical matter, genetics, and chemistry, the apara being actively animated by the descending consciousness, the para.
The source material has this incredibly memorable, almost poetic way of describing this fusion. It states, your physical body is merely dust and energy, but your awareness is the infinite observer.
Yeah.
Dust and energy animated by the infinite observer.
It paints a striking contrast, juxtaposing the temporary fragility of our biology with the eternal nature of our awareness.
It really does. And, it makes me think of putting on a high-end virtual reality headset.
Oh, let's hear this one.
Well, when you look at a VR setup sitting on a desk, you have the physical plastic headset, the internal wiring, the lenses, and the code rendering the graphics.
Right.
That entire apparatus is the dust and energy. It represents the biological mechanics, the genetic code, the physical structure of the brain. But none of that technology means anything. It experiences absolutely nothing until a human being actually straps it onto their face.
Exactly.
The person looking through those lenses is the one actually experiencing the digital environment that is the infinite observer.
The VR analogy aligns perfectly with the concept of etadyonini. The headset provides the localized perspective, right?
Yeah.
It dictates the sensory inputs, the rules of the virtual environment, and the limitations of what can be seen and heard. But the observer wearing the headset is not bound by the game's code.
Right. They're totally separate.
They existed before they put the headset on. They exist independently of the virtual world, and their fundamental nature remains unchanged when they eventually take the headset off.
Right. The user isn't made of pixels. No matter what happens to their avatar in the game, the user is safe.
And internalizing that distinction is crucial. Understanding this dual cosmic origin bridges the psychological gap between our temporary physical forms and our foundational nature.
It gives you some distance from the physical stuff.
Exactly. It serves as a reminder that while we are currently interfaced with a biological machine, processing the world through limited sensory hardware, our core identity is the observer, not the machinery itself.
Wait, I'm stuck on something here, though.
What's that?
If the first half of verse 6 perfectly explains the genesis of a single human life, the act of putting on the biological VR headset. How does this text jump from human biology to the origins of the actual universe? Because reading the second half of verse 6, the scale shifts dramatically from the individual to the cosmic.
The shift in scale is massive, yes, but conceptually it operates on the exact same principle. Krishna expands the lens from the individual organism to the totality of existence, stating, "I am the ultimate origin and the final dissolution of the entire universe."
Wow.
The Sanskrit words deployed here are prabhava, meaning the ultimate origin or emergence,
Okay, prabhana.
and pralaya, meaning the final dissolution or withdrawal.
Ultimate origin and final dissolution. Once again, this ancient scripture seems to be walking right into the territory of modern astrophysics, because the notes draw a direct parallel between these concepts and the reigning models of modern cosmology.
The chronological parallels are difficult to ignore. I mean, when we investigate Prabhava, the ultimate emergence of the universe, modern cosmology immediately points us to the Big Bang.
Right.
The prevailing model dictates that approximately 13.8 billion years ago, all matter, all energy, and the very fabric of space and time itself exploded outward from a singular point of infinite density and temperature.
The moment the cosmic VR headset was powered on, basically.
In a sense, yes. Everything physical emerged from a unified singularity. And conversely, when we examine pralaya, the final dissolution, modern astrophysics offers several potential endpoints for our universe, all of which mirror this ancient concept.
Okay, like what?
Well, there is the theory of the Big Crunch.
The Big Crunch.
Yeah, which posits that the gravitational pull of the universe's mass will eventually halt its current expansion, reversing the process and pulling all matter back together into a single, incredibly dense singularity. A reverse Big Bang, basically.
Wow, okay. But the notes also mention the heat death of the universe, which I understand is the more commonly accepted theory right now.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a terrifying concept.
It is quite bleak. The heat death, or the big freeze, is the model best supported by our current understanding of thermodynamics and dark energy.
How does that one work?
It is a scenario where the universe continues to expand indefinitely, accelerating over billions of years. As it expands, entropy, the measure of disorder and decay, relentlessly increases.
Right.
Eventually, the gas required to form new stars is exhausted. Existing stars burn through their fuel and go dark. Galaxies drift so far apart they can no longer interact. Black holes slowly evaporate through Hawking radiation.
So everything just sort of fades away.
Finally, the universe reaches a state of maximum thermodynamic equilibrium. There are no more energy transfers, no more light, no more structure. It is a complete and final dissolution of the material universe into a cold, dark void.
That is just incredibly bleak. I mean, the idea of the entire universe just slowly freezing to death in the dark isn't exactly a cheerful thought.
Yeah.
How does a spiritual text like the Gita contextualize something as depressing as universal entropy?
The source material offers a profound metaphysical reframing of this process. It suggests that the Gita places what it calls the eternal ground of being as the timeless singularity beneath all of this physical change.
The eternal ground of being.
Think of it as the foundational universal awareness we were discussing earlier, the parapraki. This unified conscious source is the ultimate singularity.
Okay, I'm following.
Space-time, physical matter, and the observable universe emerge from this conscious singularity that is the prabhava, the Big Bang. It expands, it evolves, it plays out its cosmic dance, and eventually, all of that physical manifestation dissolves back into the source, the pralaya, the heat death, or the Big Crunch.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is absolutely mind-blowing. We're talking about a philosophical text that was composed thousands of years before Galileo ever pointed a telescope at the sky.
Thousands of years.
Thousands of years before scientists mapped the cosmic microwave background radiation, or understood thermodynamics, or measured the accelerating expansion of the universe.
Yeah.
Yet this text mapped out the cosmos as a breathing process.
Yes.
It describes an ongoing rhythmic cycle of emergence and dissolution, an exhalation and inhalation of reality itself, all stemming from a single, unified, conscious source.
It represents a staggering synthesis of theology and early cosmological intuition. It demands that we view the universe not as a static, linear, dead mechanism ticking down to zero, but as a dynamic, active expression of a singular conscious source that breathes physical reality in and out over unimaginably vast scales of time.
Okay, but let's step back into the real world for a second.
Sure.
Because dealing with concepts on this scale, the Big Bang, the inevitable heat death of the universe, the dissolution of all physical matter into a cold void, it can trigger a massive amount of anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. Confronting the sheer scale of cosmic time and physical entropy is inherently overwhelming for the human psyche.
Right, because I have to ask on behalf of the listener, why should someone who is prepping for a stressful Monday morning marketing meeting or just out walking their dog care about this massive cosmic scale?
Right, what's the practical application?
Exactly. If the ultimate fate of the universe is just dust and energy dissolving into an endless dark void, what is the point of any of our daily struggles?
That feeling of futility is the exact psychological trap created by strict materialism, and it is precisely what the final section of our source material seeks to cure.
Okay, how does it cure it?
Well, we have to critically examine the profound psychological toll of viewing the world exclusively through a materialist lens. If you truly believe that you are merely an isolated, fragile biological machine, if your core identity is nothing more than a temporary accidental arrangement of dust and energy, then existential dread is not just likely, it is the only logical, rational outcome.
Because if you are just the biological hardware and the fundamental law of the universe is that all hardware eventually breaks down and decays, then your entire existence is just a ticking clock leading to absolute nothingness.
The math of materialism is unforgiving. If you are just a temporary blip of cognitive circuitry in a universe marching inevitably toward a freezing heat death, you are fundamentally meaningless. You are an infinitesimal cosmic accident stranded in a cold, dead void. It is a recipe for deep psychological suffering, alienation, and chronic anxiety.
But the reflection on the Gita offers a completely different psychological framework. It provides a practical, daily mindfulness application.
It really does.
The notes suggest that to cure this dread, you must actively shift your perspective. You have to stop identifying yourself as the temporary biological machine and start recognizing yourself as a localized expression of that universal consciousness currently experiencing itself through a physical form.
This is exactly where high-level theoretical cosmology and ancient scripture condense into a daily, highly usable mindfulness tool.
I love that.
When you truly understand the dual aspect of reality, when you internalize that your true nature is the paraprati, the infinite observer wearing the headset, your entire relationship to the physical world changes fundamentally.
So what does this all mean for the listener? Let's say I'm walking my dog, and I start feeling completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the universe, or the stress of the news, or just the friction of daily life. If I adopt this Gita mindset, I am no longer a tiny, meaningless speck of meat in a universe destined for destruction.
No, you aren't.
I am the universe. I am the foundational awareness of the cosmos, localized into a human body, experiencing a Tuesday morning. I am the universe experiencing the feeling of a nylon leash in my hand and the warmth of the sun on my face.
That is a profoundly stabilizing psychological shift. You reframe your entire locus of identity. You are no longer an isolated entity trapped in a hostile universe fighting against the inevitable decay of time.
Right.
You are a deliberate extension of its foundational awareness. You are the sensory lens through which the cosmos knows itself, rendering the physical world into subjective experience. When you genuinely grasp the weight of that, the existential dread naturally evaporates, replaced by a deep, grounded presence.
Grounded presence. That's the perfect antidote to dread.
Because from the perspective of the infinite observer, there is nothing to fear. The physical forms, the hardware, will inevitably come and go. The Big Bangs and the heat deaths, the Prabhava and Pralaya are just the natural breathing cycles of the material world.
Like seasons.
Exactly, like cosmic seasons. But the observer, the fundamental awareness that constitutes your true identity, remains entirely untouched by that physical decay. It is the eternal ground of being.
It is an incredibly empowering way to move through the world. It takes the heaviest, most intimidating concepts of modern science, the insurmountable hard problem of consciousness, the bizarre reality-bending nature of quantum mechanics, the inevitable entropic end of the physical universe, and instead of letting them crush us, it uses them to validate our deepest spiritual intuitions.
It really flips the script.
We are not cosmic accidents. We are the active, sustaining spark of the whole system.
It is a remarkable intellectual and spiritual convergence. Over the course of this deep dive, we have journeyed from redefining the basic boundaries of our biological hardware, addressed the failures of physicalism regarding the hard problem of consciousness,
Navigated the complex mechanics of the quantum observer effect.
scaled up to the astrophysics of cosmic dissolution, and finally returned to a practical state of grounded, mindful presence in our immediate daily lives.
It has been a massive journey, spanning billions of years of cosmic history, and it all stems from two short verses composed thousands of years ago on a mythological battlefield.
Incredible.
We've seen how the Gita redefines our fundamental reality, arguing forcefully that consciousness is not some fleeting chemical trick of the brain, but the foundational bedrock of the cosmos itself. It collapses the quantum wave, it actively animates our physical biology, and it offers us a tangible way to trade our existential panic for a profound, unbreakable connection to the universe.
Which raises an important question about how we apply this knowledge, because a framework like this reminds us that theoretical physics and ancient philosophy are most valuable, not as abstract thought experiments, but when they are internalized and actively applied to our lived, subjective experience.
Absolutely. The knowledge changes the user. And as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final lingering thought I want to leave everyone with.
I love these. Let's hear it.
Just something to chew on as you take off your headphones and step back into the complexity of your daily routine. If the quantum observer effect implies that our consciousness is the active substrate sustaining the cosmic web, and if we are, quite literally, the universal consciousness experiencing itself in physical form, does that mean the way we choose to focus our attention every single day isn't just a private, personal matter?
Oh, wow.
By choosing what we observe, by choosing what we focus our minds on, are we actively participating in the ongoing creation and shaping of the universe itself? Maybe we need to be a lot more careful about where we are pointing the lens. Because when it comes to reality, we aren't just helpless bystanders looking at the broken pieces of a machine. We might just be the ones writing the code.